Hey everyone, we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're taking a deep dive into the history of the Great Replacement Theory. Now, if you're not familiar with it, the Great Replacement Theory states that some mysterious shadowy elite is trying to replace the white populations of Europe and North America with immigrants, because the immigrants will be grateful, more obedient. I have no idea. Now, debunking individual conspiracy theories isn't something that I normally do. I'm more interested in the psychology behind propaganda, but this idea is influencing elections all over the world, and it's currently shaping policy in the United States and Europe, so I figured it was time to take a closer look at it. I've been digging into the history of this thing for a couple of months now, and I've got to tell you, it's weird. But what the Great Replacement Theory lacks in common sense, it seems to make up for in staying power. Most people say the Great Replacement Theory started in France in 2011, but people have been talking about this idea for almost 700 years, which makes you wonder, when is this great replacement supposed to happen? If you're a true believer in the Great Replacement Theory, I know that nothing I say in this video is going to change your mind. But if you're someone who's heard about this crazy idea and has been doing a little Googling because you're curious to see what it's all about, stick around. The term Great Replacement was coined in 2011 by French writer Renaud Camus, who believes that a genocidal bloc of political and social elites is committing genocide by substitution on the white population of Europe and specifically France because reasons. He describes this political and social elite as, quote, Jews, women, homosexuals, secularists, and champions of freedom of thought and speech. You know, all the people holding all the positions of power in the world today. But Camus is not a white supremacist. He's not even far right, so don't call him that or he'll be very upset. He just has no problem voting for far-right politicians and speaking at far-right conferences. Renaud Camus is often credited as the creator of the Great Replacement Theory, but as I said up top, that's not really true. The idea's been around for a while. Camus just gave it a much-needed brand refresh. It used to be known as ethnic inversion, which, let's face it, is a terrible name, and white genocide, which is somehow even worse. Like, genocide's such an ugly word. Isn't there some way we can get, great in there? The term white genocide was coined by American David Lane, who, unlike Camus, was a proud white supremacist and openly accused the global Jewish conspiracy of trying to get rid of white people. Lane published the White Genocide Manifesto in 1995 while he was serving a 190-year prison sentence for his activities as a founding member of a racist terror group called the Order. The Order was responsible for at least 3 murders, and they stole millions of dollars to fund their activities and the activities of other racist groups. Lane was nothing if not prolific while in prison. In addition to the White Genocide Manifesto, he also coined the infamous 14-word slogan still used by neo-Nazi groups to this day, and the 88 precepts of white supremacy. I will link to more about them in the show notes. Now, I'm only half joking when I describe Camus' reframing of white genocide as the Great Replacement Theory as a brand refresh. Camus did a lot to make the idea more palatable to the general public. For one thing, Camus wasn't serving a 190-year prison sentence when he published his ideas, which really boosted his credibility. Also, by using the more vague term elites as opposed to openly accusing a Jewish conspiracy, he managed to mute the more anti-Semitic overtones behind the concept. By the way, I don't want to imply here that Lane and Camus were collaborators in any way. I don't think they even knew each other existed. Each represents a different flavor of the Great Replacement Theory. One version says that the white race is sleepwalking into its own destruction, while the other says that the replacement of the white race is being engineered by a cabal of some kind. But this idea of a white native population being replaced by immigrants doesn't even start with Camus and Lane. 1973 saw the publication of The Camp of the Saints, an apocalyptic novel depicting the collapse of France and subsequently the entire Western world by a sudden mass migration from India. This book is, to put it mildly, bonkers. It's actually tough to summarize because it's so weird, but I'm going to give it a go. In the novel, Belgium announces that they're going to restrict migration from India, which for some reason triggers a panic and convinces hundreds of thousands of Indians that they need to move to France. They set off for France from India, which is not near France, in a flotilla of boats fueled by poop, led by a man who eats his own poop. There's a lot of poop in this book. I'm going to skip over the rest of the stuff they describe happening on the boats because it's freaking nasty. Western liberal journalists call for Europe to welcome the Indian people and even go so far as to cover it up when the Indians murder an emissary from the Vatican. The French president dithers as the flotilla approaches France, unable to formulate a response until it's too late. The Indians land. The population of southern France flees to the north, allowing the Indians to sweep through the country behind them. And so, like 100,000 immigrants take over a country that has a population of 53 million people. This success inspires similar movements worldwide, and within a few years, every Western government, including the United States of America, is overthrown. Even Russia is overwhelmed by waves of Chinese peasants streaming over their borders. Like I said, this book is bonkers. But not bonkers enough to make it a fringe publication. Far-right politicians all over Europe love it. It's been used to guide policy in Italy and Hungary. Trump allies Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon are big fans of it. And former US President Ronald Reagan is said to have said that it's an impressive piece of work. Camus cites the Camp of the Saints as an inspiration, along with the infamous Rivers of Blood speech given 5 years earlier by British politician Enoch Powell. Powell wrote the speech to protest an anti-discrimination law and claimed that the government was blind to the threat immigration posed to the United Kingdom. According to Powell, immigration could only lead to political domination of the country's white population and eventually to violent conflict. But immigration wasn't always seen as the primary threat to white native populations. Going back to the 1800s and 1900s, we see versions of the Great Replacement theory that focus more on miscegenation as the primary threat to the white race. And miscegenation is hard to say, so I'm just going to call it intermarriage. American author and eugenicist Madison Grant was concerned that the Nordic race, whom he considered to be the founders of the United States, was committing racial suicide by embracing immigration and especially intermarriage, which he felt was corrupting pure Nordic blood. I should mention that Grant considered pretty much anyone north of Spain to be Nordic. Nordics were the bravest, best-looking, hardest-working people in the whole world. And if anybody else in Europe did anything impressive, like, say, Greeks or Romans, well, according to Grant, it's because they were influenced by the Nordics. Seriously. While he was an equal opportunity bigot, Grant did have particular concern about Jewish immigration and warned that white Christian New Yorkers were in danger of, quote, being driven off the streets by swarms of Polish Jews. And, once again, this was not a fringe idea. Grant's books were bestsellers in the United States up until around World War II. Teddy Roosevelt was a fan. And Grant's work remains highly influential among white supremacists to this day. While Grant subscribed to the sleepwalking into destruction version of the theory, Edouard Drumont shared David Lane's belief that replacement was deliberate and orchestrated by a vast Jewish conspiracy. Drumont was a politician and the editor of a stridently anti-Semitic newspaper. He also wrote one of the defining texts of anti-Semitism, Le France Juive, or Jewish France, which, as you can see, had a pretty intense marketing campaign. I don't think I have to tell you that Le France Juive was a massive hit, and it currently has 3.6 stars on Goodreads. Drumont felt that France had been Judaized by the French Revolution, which allowed Jewish financiers, aided by the Freemasons, because why the hell not, to infiltrate the highest echelons of French society. This unholy coalition was now seeking to dilute the blood of native French people and replace them with neo-French, because the Jewish people were jealous of native French people's good looks, creativity, and work ethic. And I think you see a pattern forming here. Oh, and also getting rid of native French people was going to make them all rich somehow. Drumont also blamed Jewish people for the Eiffel Tower, which he considered an eyesore. But even Grant and Drumont were not the earliest proponents of the Great Replacement theory. I'm going to skip over a few dozen other examples and wind the clock all the way back to the earliest example I could find, which is in 1348 during the time of the Black Plague. By the time it burned itself out, the Black Plague had killed around 20 million people in Europe over the course of 3 years. This was roughly 50% of the population of Europe at the time. People thought it was the end of the world, and it was hard to argue otherwise. During that time, someone, it's unclear who, noticed that Jewish people were dying in fewer numbers than Christians. Now, there were several reasons for this. For one thing, Jewish people tended to live separately from their Christian neighbors, and they also tended to not use the same drinking wells. I should also add here that when I say Jewish people were dying in fewer numbers, I mean like 3 fewer Jewish people died than Christians in the same city. Soon a conspiracy theory started to spread, saying that Jewish people had somehow engineered the plague in order to get rid of all the Christians and take their land. Authorities in Geneva, eager to get to the bottom of all this, investigated the case in the best way they knew how, which was to grab a random Jewish guy off the street and torture him until he told them what they wanted to hear. And what they wanted to hear was that he, at the direction of his rabbi, had been poisoning Christian wells with a toxin made from frogs, lizards, spiders, and Christian hearts. And you can probably find a wellness influencer out there who would promote that as a diet. I mean, frogs and lizards are good lean protein. Christian hearts, pure. Spiders are like strong silky hair, I guess. This kicked off a wave of persecution across Europe that saw the entire Jewish population of some cities burned alive. The carnage was so extreme that the Pope himself felt he needed to intervene, but his papal bull telling everyone to knock it off accomplished little, and the massacres didn't subside until the plague itself had subsided. So, there you go. The history of the Great Replacement Theory from 1348 until today. Now, I know every pundit and podcaster out there pushing this idea acts like they just discovered it, but like I said, people have been talking about this idea for almost 700 years. So once again, I have to ask the question that I asked up top. When is this supposed to happen? It's been 700 years. Seriously, any plan that takes 700 years to pull off is a terrible plan. Also, the idea of a pure bloodline is a myth. Human history is a history of migration and intermarriage. Just look at France, where we started this video. Their language is from Italy. Their dominant religion is from the Middle East. And the whole northern part of the country was ruled by Vikings for a while. So, given the idea's long history and lack of ever actually happening, we have to wonder why people believe in it. And there are a couple of reasons for that. It tends to resurface in times of social and economic upheaval. When people feel that the ground beneath their feet isn't as solid as it used to be, they look for reasons. And if they can't find a reason, they look for someone to blame. The late Hans Rosling writes extensively about this in his book Factfulness, and he attributes it to the brain jumping to conclusions in order to save energy. You can learn more about that phenomenon in this video. Humans are also naturally tribal creatures, and it's pretty easy to get us riled up against an enemy, especially an invisible enemy like some evil cabal that runs the world. You can watch this video to learn more about that. And once people are in a group, they tend to be willing to go to extremes to prove their loyalty to the group. This video has more about that. Also, immigration tends to be unevenly distributed within a country, so the demographics of one area can change quite rapidly while the overall demographics of the country don't change that much. I've lived in diverse neighborhoods for pretty much my entire adult life, and I've seen how quickly an area's demographics can change. Thanks to the availability heuristic, which tends to make us think that our personal experience is the universal experience, something like that can feel like an invasion. And you can learn more about the availability heuristic here. Some sociologists note that belief in the Great Replacement Theory is strongest in countries that used to be colonial powers, and now they somehow fear being colonized themselves. I find this interesting because the only place I can think of where immigration, actually directed by a powerful economic elite, resulted in the almost total replacement of a native population is North America. Other sociologists think that belief in the Great Replacement Theory is driven by anxiety over declining birth rates in Europe and North America. Basically, they are afraid of being outbred by the global South. Global birth rates, though, are in decline almost everywhere because almost everyone on Earth is currently broke, overworked, stressed out, and some of us are in countries that are currently being bombed, on fire, or underwater. But anxiety over declining birth rates is an important aspect of the Great Replacement Theory because, believe it or not, it's not just about immigration. Great Replacement thinking has been used to justify policies restricting abortion rights, interracial marriage, LGBTQ rights, and women's rights in general, because we don't need them women in the office. We need them home birthing. Up until this point, I've been describing the Great Replacement Theory from a European and American perspective because we're the OG believers. But this style of rhetoric, which demonizes fear of the other, is a beloved tactic used by demagogues all over the world. In India, Hindu nationalist politicians are using Great Replacement style rhetoric to whip up fear of a Muslim takeover, even though Indians are the villains of the Camp of the Saints. Not to be outdone, hard-right politicians in Malaysia are using Great Replacement rhetoric to encourage restrictions on immigration from India. And even though immigration from Northern Africa is currently driving much of Europe's embrace of the Great Replacement theory, politicians in Tunisia are using a version of it to warn of immigration from Southern Africa, turning Tunisia into, quote, a purely African state. Now, I've been clowning on this idea for about 15 minutes, but you need to know that believers in the Great Replacement theory take it very, very seriously. On July 22, 2011, Anders Breivik bombed a government building in Oslo, Norway, killing 8 people and injuring an additional 209 people. He then attacked a youth summer camp, killing 69 people, mostly teenagers, and injuring another 32. In his manifesto, published shortly before the attack, he expressed his fear of immigrants replacing white Norwegians and his dismay over Norway's declining birth rate. On August 11, 2017, a group of far-right activists marched through Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." This kicked off 24 hours of violence that ended with 1 person dead and at least another 65 injured. On October 27, 2018, Robert Bowers murdered 11 people and injured another 6 at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because he believed that Jewish people were facilitating an immigrant invasion of the United States. On March 15, 2019, Brenton Tarrant entered a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, and shot dead 51 people. Another 89 were injured. The title of his manifesto was actually The Great Replacement. And again in 2019, on August 3rd, Patrick Crusius shot and killed 23 people and wounded another 22 at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. His stated reason for doing so was to save America from a Hispanic invasion. And on May 14, 2022, 18-year-old Peyton Gendron live-streamed his attack on a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, during which he shot and killed 10 people and injured an additional 3. He, too, expressly cited the Great Replacement theory as part of his motivation. This is only a partial list of the violent acts inspired by the Great Replacement theory. All propaganda is dangerous, but this is propaganda with a body count. So if you're that viewer who clicked on this video because you're curious to see what the Great Replacement theory is all about, and you're still here, this is what it's all about. It's about looking at your neighbor and seeing an invader. And if you do that long enough and hard enough, eventually you might do something that you can't take back. Links to all the sources and elements used to create this video are available in the description. And as always, thanks for watching. And what are you going to remind me to do when I'm done?
You're done?
When I'm done. Shoot a thumbnail.
Maybe you should shoot the thumbnail first.
No.
Why not?
That'd be too easy.